kick it off, Wes, when the numbers are in?
That's right. Welcome, everybody. And we normally wait just a few minutes until all the participants get in. Thank you so much for joining us for the Restaurant and Catering WA webinar in relation to vaccine mandates coming soon. The numbers are exploding in participants, but we certainly want to make sure that everyone gets into the webinar before we get started. And then we'll start off with Petrina and then straight into the bulk of the webinar. Wow, the numbers are just flying. It's certainly great to see so many Western Australia members and prospective members and councillors, and hopefully our state chair on the webinar. And wow, that's I'm very happy with the list. Certainly. Hello, Lee. Good to see you there, and all the other participants. All right, Petrina. I think we are slowly hitting that that mark where we're a high enough percentage of the potential attendees. Yeah, I think we are good to go.
Beautiful. Well, first of all, good morning, and for those of you who know me, who I say daily, happy Thursday to you all. We truly appreciate and acknowledge you for taking time out of your schedules today to better understand and to be a part of our webinar. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Restaurant and Catering Association acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Again, I would also like to welcome you all to the Restaurant and Catering Association WA Vaccine Mandate Explainer, explaining things you may know and some you may not. I'm Petrina Broaden, for those of you who do not know me, the WA Membership Executive, and I'm very representing the Restaurant and Catering Association here in WA. A little note for you also before we begin, I'll be posting the link for the WA Safe Transition Toolkit in the Q&A chat, to which you'll find all tools required to support you and your business within the transition, for example, social media tiles, posters, proof of vax, masks, for those of you who have not accessed as yet. So I'll be putting that into the Q&A chat alongside my email. So for any further support after today's webinar, I'm more than happy for you to reach out and I can help out best. Now, moving on, I would love to introduce you to Mr. Wes Lambert, our CEO of Restaurant and Catering, and Mr. Hugo Robinson, our Head of Policy and Government from Restaurant and Catering, presenting today's webinar and helping clarify questions and concerns you may have, which I'm sure a few of you do. So over to you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thanks, Petrina. And I'll reiterate, once we begin the Q&A, or really any time during our presentation, which will be brief, this webinar is really for you to ask us questions and for us to answer the questions that we can answer, but also take questions on notice and take them back to the relevant departments and ministers in WA to ensure that we get you the right answer. Because the public health orders have not yet been published, this is all based upon roundtable meetings that we've had with the departments and also emails that they have sent us and questions that we've already asked. So this is the best information that we have at the moment. And certainly we have seen curveballs in the public health orders in other states. So certainly once those are published, we will issue a EDM explainer that has a summary. And if anything has changed, we'll certainly let you know immediately. But I'm going to quickly start off with a state of the nation before we get into the vaccine mandate requirements as of 31 Jan. So as you know, and you may be feeling in WA, WA has continued to be quite strong for hospitality. Maybe not all of your businesses, but certainly according to some of our partners that provide us with information, WA is tracking at about 30+% year over year versus 2021 and 2020. So certainly congratulations to your state for continuing to be one of the highest growth states in terms of hospitality. We know that there is a critical workforce shortage in the industry at the moment that has persisted in WA I think more strongly than any other state, because your border has been closed throughout almost the entire pandemic, with the exception of just a very few amount of weeks and months that we could actually travel, or that workers could come. And certainly you would all know quite readily that there are no working holiday makers and there's no international students in Australia. I was on the phone this morning to the relevant ministers, speaking about the working holiday makers and international students, and certainly happy to announce and what the immigration minister and prime minister have said this week about international students and working holiday makers that return to Australia in the next 8 to 12 weeks will have their visa fees waived. But also something that wasn't published in the speech made by the prime minister was that working holiday makers can actually work for your business for all of 2022. Now that's a huge change. Normally working holiday makers weren't allowed to stay with the same ABN number for an extended period of time, but any working holiday makers that you have working with you now can stay with you until the end of 2022 and hopefully beyond. Certainly WA has not yet had the Omicron wave like the other states, and we have preemptively reached out to the relevant departments and the government for potential stimulus because we know it's coming. So we've put them on notice that we are going to be asking them for stimulus once there are increased case numbers in WA, once the state borders open up. Now, certainly on the East Coast, we've seen case numbers potentially plateauing, and hopefully they will begin that slow daily downward trend and get us to those 4 digits per day, back down to about 2,000 cases a day by March. So workforce shortage, we're working on it. We're working with the immigration minister, doing our best to come up with solutions. Certainly training up Australian unemployed staff that could potentially work in your business, working with the government on solutions about older age employees and removing caps on retirement and double incomes, and really think outside the box to come up with any possible solution to allow you to continue to operate your businesses as successfully as you have been in WA. So that's a brief state of the nation on what's going on in terms of skills and migration and staff. And certainly we've seen your costs going up in terms of produce and supply chain. And we'll tell you that this is the year of price increases. And I know many of you are very reticent and reluctant to raise your prices, but it's been a decade that coffees have been, $4 or steaks have been $28, and it's just not sustainable. So hopefully through COVID, one of the pivots that you've done is raising your prices in line with your increased labor and your increased produce and rent costs. So hopefully you've done that. If you haven't, don't be surprised that many of your competitors have. It certainly has been seen around the country that prices are on the increase, anywhere between 10 and 20%. And because they're just happy to be able to continue to dine out, especially in WA. So now quickly over to the vaccine mandates. So I know many of you are reluctant or apprehensive about the 31st of January. We've gotten lots of emails and lots of phone calls of members that are asking the same questions that we got on the East Coast over the past 6 months or so. Do I have to do it? I'm a hospitality business and I don't want to discriminate against my customers. I don't want to do that. Ultimately, the public health order that's going to be issued either tomorrow or early next week is a law just like any other law. It's a law like the liquor license laws that you follow, or the food handler or food safety laws that you follow, or the DA that you use to open your business. It is just a state law, and it is as valid as every other law. And it is not your responsibility, meaning it isn't something that you have to make a choice on. And we saw apprehension from businesses on the East Coast that their customers would think that somehow they had a choice, but it didn't eventuate into anything. And on the flip side, businesses that systematically refused to follow the public health orders in New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland, where there either are or were vaccine mandates in place. The authorities were very swift to close those businesses down, not just fine them, but actually close them. So it is very important that you understand that the authorities are not going to police you. They're not going to, be going door to door to every business asking to see people's check-ins. That's not what they're going to do. However, if you are openly flouting the rules, if you're openly saying, I'm not going to do it on Facebook and with big signs in front of your business, believe me, they will come and they will close you and they will take away your liquor license or take away, your landlord will take away your lease. We have seen this around the country and it's unfortunate. And certainly it is a worst case scenario. And we wish that the states didn't have to issue these public health orders, but it has worked so far in other states in order to increase the vaccine rate, which certainly is seeing hospitalizations and mortality as a percentage much less than the Delta outbreak. So while the whole numbers are quite big on the East Coast for cases and hospitalizations in ICU, as a percentage, it's very low. So, certainly it isn't the best scenario that vaccine mandates are in place from the 31st of Jan, but we saw some success with that early on in the pandemic in getting those vax rates up into the mid 90s and higher. So if you're asking if your business is required to do it, if you're a restaurant, cafe, bar, pub, club, tavern, and any business that's a nightclub, dine-in, fast food, you are required to do it. If you have dine-in, but you are just doing takeaway, you still have to do it because you are a restaurant. It is the type of business that you are. It's not the action that you're providing, okay? It's the type of business that you are. If you're a roadhouse or a service station, you are exempt in those two scenarios, even if you serve hot food. And from a customer point of view, customers that are approaching your business specifically for takeaway, like takeaway coffee, don't have to prove vaccine status. So once they sit down, once they identify to you that they're going to be dine-in, then you must take reasonable steps to ensure that they have been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, which at the moment is 2 shots. Now, you're asking what are reasonable steps? Well, reasonable steps are either at the front of your business, at the point of sale, or when they sit down to order, taking reasonable steps for your staff to determine their vaccine status. Now, that's seeing their Service WA app, that's citing their printed paper certificate with an ID, or that's seeing their digital wallet and their Medicare digital wallet certificate that is on an iPhone or an Android phone. And again, we saw a question in the chat, but please put your questions in the Q&A if you can. It isn't what part of your business is where people are eating, it is what your business is. So indoor, outdoor doesn't matter. Your business is a restaurant or a pub or a club or a tavern or a cafe or a caterer. And so therefore your business is required to check the vaccine status. It doesn't matter indoor or outdoor. All that matters is the customer sitting down to eat or are they taking away? And so it's, the idea is if they're only going to be there for a few minutes to pick some, it certainly is, if they're only going to be there for a few moments to pick something up, it's certainly reasonable that you're not checking, but you are required under what we expect to be the public health order that's delivered tomorrow to check everyone. So it's not a sampling, it's everyone. On the flip side, your staff. So I know many of you, especially those who have staff between 18 and 29, who may be reluctant to get vaccinated. You certainly must check their vaccine status, and the public health order will determine whether you have to check it every time they come to work, or if you can check it one time and record that data. And yes, I understand that most of you will say, I'm not allowed to record my staff's medical data. actually, public health orders carry the force of the Biosecurities Act. And yes, for that period of time, if the public health order says you need to list name, date, employee ID, and what proof they showed you, certainly in the other states that was deemed totally fine. And in fact, there have been many court cases on the East Coast, and in every single case, they lost. So the public health orders were always valid in terms of their validity as public health orders. So I can see people putting questions in the chat. Please, if possible, use the Q&A instead of the chat, which is just a few icons over from the chat. Ultimately, most public health orders on the East Coast, you weren't required or even allowed to keep track of your customers' vaccine status unless they were elderly or didn't have a device, had the printed copy but not the device. You certainly, in some cases, could keep track of it if you were required to under the public health order, but the public health order will say what the requirements are in terms of record keeping, and anyone is only speculating if they tell you yet what those rules are going to be. Typically, that's right at the end, right at the writing of the public health orders, when it's decided exactly what needs to be recorded and not recorded. And those have even been tweaked in some states and changed a little bit based upon on feedback. So I see some more questions coming into the chat. So I'm going to quickly answer those just to keep things moving. So if your customers stay on your property to eat and drink, then it's not takeaway. That is dine in. So it is quite important that that the distinction is, are they consuming food and beverage on your property? That means that it is not takeaway, it's dine in. So anyone who sits down or even standing, if they're leaning against something, if they're consuming on your premise, that is considered to be dine in. So there aren't a ton of details in terms of the specifics of what the public health order is going to say, other than you will need to check in and show your proof of vaccine status, and that staff will also need to prove to the business. And it isn't to work, it's actually to enter your premise. So what the effective public health orders under the Biosecurity Act do is say that people are not allowed to be on site in your premise unless they do something. So it's not your staff, and you shouldn't be saying to your staff, you can't work for me because you're not vaccinated. It's, you can't enter my premise. And a good example is if a construction worker turned up to a construction site in a t-shirt, shorts, and thongs, by law in WA, that person would not be allowed to enter that construction site. And if they turned up every day for a week to try to get onto that construction site without a hard hat, a vest, and hard toe shoes, they might be terminated because they're unavailable to work. Typically, the public health orders on the East Coast had the same effect, that if your staff didn't turn up ready to work, that it wasn't that their vaccine status in terms of you saying you can't work because you're not vaccinated. It was, you can't enter my premise because there's a public health order in place. Now, from a fair work point of view, I'm sure that some of you might have read cases where big companies couldn't mandate vaccines for all their employees. Totally true. There have been a couple of cases where large companies, the unions for those particular industries were able to fight that big companies couldn't mandate that whole groups of employees were vaccinated. This is nothing like that. This is a state public health order. And so if an employee refuses to follow the public health order, then you as an employer can follow the normal processes through Fair Work and use it as a defense that the employee was unavailable to work or refused to be unavailable to work. And certainly we can help you through any undismissals or any counseling. The process is the same as any other process in terms of Fair Work. It is important that you counsel your employees, helping them to realize that ultimately 100% of Australians will be vaccinated, because you won't be able to cross state lines, take international flights. There's a lot of services on the East Coast that you cannot participate in unless you're vaccinated. Certainly the states that have left vaccination mandates in place for long periods of time. And WA has said that they don't know when this vaccine mandate's going to end. So one of the arguments that was given by some employers was that their employees were going to attorneys or friends who were attorneys and saying, oh, this is going to end in the future, and so you can't discipline me. Well, the WA Premier has said he doesn't know when it's going to end, and so that is really what you would need in terms of requirements. So medical exemptions and masks. The public health order will determine the medical exemption that's required. And the public health order will give you the legal authority to cite the medical exemption. So you'll have some employees that say, oh, you're not allowed to see my medical blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not true. There's a public health order. You are unavailable to work unless you can prove you're vaccinated, or unless your medical exemption is valid. And the same with masks. When mask mandates are in place, it's the same thing. There are medical exemptions for mask wearing, and certainly you will need to wear them. So before we get on to the Q&A, Hugo has some very important additional information to pass on.
Thanks, Wes. Hi, everybody. I'm Hugo Robinson. I'm Manager of Policy and Government at Restaurant Catering Australia. I think just to clear up some conceptions about how this works and what it will look like from the 31st is, for most people going into this vaccine mandate and having to check all of these certificates, I will say that over East, they've found that the process is a lot quicker than you would actually expect. Most customers are pretty good with having their pass and their certificate ready to go as they enter. They'll have the QR code check-in anyway, so they already have that ready to go. It's as simple as having a look at their phone and saying, yep, that's it. For those people asking, whether the regulars who need, to show their vaccinations, if you know that they're fully vaccinated and you've cited that and you can attest to the fact that they are fully vaccinated, you don't have to check them every single time, obviously, because you know that they're fully vaccinated. And if there was some query about that, then it's pretty clear that they are fully vaccinated. In terms of Claire's question about the close and casual contact for workplace, basically over East, there's a situation where close and casual contacts are situated in a place where if you are a household contact of a positive case, you are a close contact, which must basically be forced to isolate. There's no such thing as
Hugo, that's the federal definition of close contact. Yeah.
Well, it really comes down to whether WA follows that, and we have to make sure. I'm not going to say for sure they will, because I'm not going to be a prophet on this thing. And WA has their own way of doing things, obviously. So we could have a situation where either you get Omicron and you have to isolate, or if you're a casual or close contact in the workplace, that you don't have to isolate whatsoever. In terms of mobile catering services, yes, it will come down to the household itself to check whether they want to do that, if there even is a law that's passed in the public health order saying that you need to be fully vaccinated. Over East, there's no requirement for fully vaccinated to be at a house setting. So you could still function from a house catering perspective. In terms of records for the vax status, up to your second vax, there's no requirements for your staff to have booster shots at the moment in Western Australia, and there's no requirements for you to keep that on record. Obviously, booster shots will be rolled out, and people in WA are currently having booster shots, but there's no need for you to have that at the moment. This public health order is only for the second dose for your staff and for customers. And if your customer has a medical exemption, then yes, you can ask to see that medical exemption, and it must be one that's valid on the federal Medicare website, which outlines the reasons for having a medical exemption.
So for many of you, you might get customers that turn up with a note from their doctor that they're allowed, they're exempt from wearing a mask, or they're exempt from vaccine status. That's not good enough. It has been deemed on the East Coast that it has to follow very particular guidelines. New South Wales has a template, and in the other states, it's a very specific what the letter needs to say, because the GP may lose their license to practice medicine if they give a medical exemption for a COVID vaccination that's based upon anything other than 5 or 6 reasons not to get a COVID vaccination. And those are very particular to having had adverse reactions to previous COVID vaccinations, having had COVID, or being allergic to all vaccinations. So for example, the GP that's going to give someone a medical exemption has to have cited that person's vaccine status of all vaccinations. So did they get the flu shot every year? Have they had all of their youth vaccinations? If that's the case, they will not be exempt from the COVID vaccination. And so we do have cases of employees turning up with letters from family members who are GPs, or really trying to get out of it. They're not valid. They actually have to be in the form as determined by TAGI. And so it's very specific. And you have the right to ask them under the public health orders to provide the correct form. And most of the time they're unable to because they're getting it from a GP that's sympathetic rather than the proper form. So certainly throw your questions at us. We're here to answer as many as possible. Beautiful. There's more questions. Happy days. Hugo.
Yeah, so question from Peter that says, we have a separate restaurant and takeaway under the same ABN at the same location, separate entrances. Does our takeaway need to also do vaccination check of all customers? So yeah, as I said, as Wes said, any hospitality, all staff have to be fully vaccinated. And if they're dining in, then that's when they have to show their full vaccinations. If they only do a takeaway, there is no need to check their full vaccination. They can get takeaway and then leave immediately.
I would say, Ada, it's reasonable steps. So it's really up to you to determine what reasonable steps are. So someone has a Medicare vaccine certificate and they have a passport, that's fine. It's just determining that they haven't grabbed a mate's or a friend's or a family member's certificate and are fraudulently trying to give that to you.
Yep. We have a question from Raymond asking about customers staff who claim health exemptions. Yes, it applies to them as well. They will need, if they are seeking to have a health exemption from the COVID vaccine, they will need a valid letter and exemption to do so. And basically use your best judgment on it. If it looks like it was screwed on the back of a bar coaster, then it's probably safe to say that it's a fraud. And it does come down to a health issue. There's nothing in the ATAGI rules which have like a conscientious objector or religious grounds. It has to be for health. In terms of areas which have low mobile reception, basically, they can just sort of print off the vaccination certificate that they get if they can't show you over their phone. But for the most part, the app will have it on the app without the use for mobile data at all. You can have your phone turned off. Well, you can have your phone data turned off and you can still show the certificate. The QR code for checking in, if your systems are down and the QR code is not working, you can sign them in manually via paper and pen, just so you know that they're there, and you can hold that data for about 30 days. There's a question from Francesca in the chat, which is, do you need to see ID with the Safe WA app? No, you don't need to see ID for that. It will be tied to the app anyway, so the ID is not needed for the digital form. Helen asks, there's a huge black market currently for fake immunization certificates. How can you tell if it's fake? then you need to report it. The public health order requires you just to check on reasonable grounds that you have seen a certificate. I don't think there is a huge black market currently. There's still over 90% of West Australians have had the vaccine. So that would only really be 10%. And of that 10%, I doubt all of them are getting, fake vaccination certificates. But you just have to make sure that you did your best to check diligently. If someone came and presented a pretty good fake ID to you, it's very hard for you to properly check that. And the same goes for vaccine certificates. A guest attending an outdoor movie or function in the grounds of our winery restaurant required to wear masks. We'll have to see what the mask mandate is in the public health order.
So Hugo, right now, the one that was published on the 16th of Jan is indoor public settings. So as of right now, it's indoor public settings. So we'll certainly have to see how it comes out in the final public health order. But as of right now, masks are mandatory in Perth and Peel for indoor settings from 6 p.m. 16 Jan. Yeah,
100%. But I guess I'll just say that anything could change with the new one, only because from obviously the 5th, borders will be open and we'll start seeing more and more cases in WA. So there could either be further restrictions, but it could also be, left the same as it is. An anonymous attendee writes, is the requirement for the employer/owner to be vaccinated takeaway shops still not necessary? If you work or are inside the premises working, no matter who you are, you must be fully vaccinated and be able to prove that. So there's no exemptions for the owner in takeaway. And I also stress as well, if you're just doing takeaway, staff still have to be fully vaccinated. So Sylvia asks, if I have a staff member who wants to have the new Novavax, oh, sorry, Wes, you just closed that off, mate. I can't read that.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, if in the new Novavax, are they able to wait till after the 31st for the shot? Sorry, I didn't mean to close that out.
No, that's all right,
but you can hit the answer button if you want to and have a look. But ultimately, they asked if I have a staff member who wants new Novavax, but I don't know when she can get it. It's just been approved today. What if it's after the 31st? They have to be vaccinated by the 31st.
So she can't. If that staff member wants to be fully vaxxed by Novavax, then they have to wait for the Novavax to give them their full dose. They can't just wait for another vaccine, basically. So they don't get an exemption for that. So I think that answers the next question from Ian as well. What if a customer refuses to provide a certificate and refuses to leave? So this is going to be something that the government will make very clear, as they've done over East, is you have the right to call the police if they are refusing to leave and refusing to provide any proof of vaccination. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, and I don't think that there's been too many cases of that happening, apart from people who are seeking to get some form of attention on the internet. But if it does come to that, just like if someone was to enter your premises incredibly inebriated and was causing trouble, you can call the police for assistance. Obviously, if you can try and talk them down from the situation, then that's preferable. But if it goes out of hand, if there's any sign of violence or any sign of aggression, then I would suggest that please call the police. The Mark asks, there's no difference in how we check the certificates on the Service and Safe WA app. Basically, with the Service WA app, again, it's just a certificate tied to that, so that's fine. It's really only the printed certificate that you have to see an ID. If it's on a phone, then there's no need to see the ID. And then Adrian asks, if we are checking vaccine certificates at the counter when staff order and someone orders takeaway, then sits down in the cafe and we don't notice, will we be liable? Is that diligent enough? Yeah, basically you just have to make sure that everyone who comes in who wants to sit down, you have to check that they have the vaccine certificate. If they come in, take a seat for 2 seconds and then get up again, then obviously, that's use your common sense on that one. There's no need to police it overly. But basically, yeah, if they're looking just to dine in, then please make sure that they are fully vaccinated before doing so. Raymond asks, do contractors who are not on site during service also be required to be vaccinated? Currently, I believe the rules are no. You don't have to check that yourself.
It'll be in the public health order. We have had a few curveballs on the East Coast where in the 11th hour, they deem who does and doesn't need to be checked. So certainly we'll be paying very close attention to that in the public health order. It's usually based upon time and premise. So, if your cleaners take 4 or 5 hours to clean your huge venue, then it'll be a different answer than if you're a small, 10-seat coffee shop. So we'll wait for those to be published.
Yep. I think that sort of answers Raymond's other question as well. But just to answer Mark's question, just to confirm, a cafe with dine-in and takeaway, people taking away don't need to show vaccine certificate. No, they don't have to show their vaccine certificate if they are only getting takeaway.
Sorry, Hugo, I'm going to jump in there, but just to clarify, because I've had many questions on that one as well. So obviously with the takeaway, they don't need to, and I think I raised it with you yesterday, but we mentioned a time frame of say 15 minutes for them to hang around and then grab the takeaway. So obviously if someone's going to abuse that and do the takeaway, but they hang out in the venue for say half an hour, that obviously goes.
If they're consuming, consume, so the moment they drink that coffee, they're they're dining in your premise. So takeaway means get it and leave. If you're drinking, you're dining in. That's it. If you take a bite of your food while you talk to your friends, you're dining in. You need to see their certificate. So that's really the difference between the two. Peter's question about the COVID safe plans, ultimately those will be also based upon the public health order. On the East Coast states, the public health orders actually did say whether you needed to update your COVID safe plan. And in fact, there were some new templates provided. So if those are updated, we'll certainly put those out in our EDM next week.
Yep. Is there an obligation? Yeah. So as I said, like with the online, with the ones that you see on the phone, you can check the IDs on there, but mostly they will be tied to the Service WA app. So I think you'll get very few of those coming through. Mark asks about deep cleaning if you have a COVID case. Again, that will be in the public health order. The current norm over East is basically that there's no need to deep clean anymore. There was originally, but that's not currently a thing. And you won't have to shut down probably to do a deep clean if you do have a positive case in the workplace. Sabine asks, what are my rights if an entire table walks out because one of the group isn't vaccinated? Should we get deposits, non-refundable? Can we invoice them afterwards even? Well, basically it's your house policy whether you do deposits to come in beforehand. But basically you can't, if you don't do that in the first place and you don't ask for money down, then you can't charge them and invoice them after they all leave. But yeah, basically if one of the people in the party isn't vaccinated, that one person can't come in, no matter what, basically. We have, when are we expecting the public health order to be published? Basically, it will probably either come out tomorrow or early next week ahead of the vaccine mandate itself. There's a question there again about do suppliers, delivery drivers, etc., need to be checked for proof of vaccination? Again, we'll have to see in the public health order, but it's typically the norm where you don't have to check that if they're coming in and picking something up or dropping something off because they're not consuming on your premises. What if customers place an order, sit down to wait for their order to be ready, possibly wait up to 20 minutes, but not eating, drinking, simply waiting? Do we need to see their certificate? That's an interesting one. I think that if they're there just for takeaway and they're leaving immediately, then no, they don't have to be checked. But there could be something in the public health order which says something about sitting down. We've seen
normally it's sitting also. So
yeah,
if someone is attending your premise, oftentimes the public health orders will determine whether you have to stay outside or not. There were some pretty strict conditions in one state's public health orders on the East about waiting for your meal, because ultimately it's about how much time you're in the premise. So if you say waiting up to 20 minutes, that there's a rule of thumb that the health authorities have used is 15 minutes. So again, it really is, it's your responsibility as a business to take reasonable effort. And if at that moment a council employee or the authorities came in to check, you wouldn't want to be caught out with someone sitting down. So it's important that you take reasonable steps.
Elena asks about they have a cafe/kiosk that only serves takeaway and is part of the food court. If the customer purchases takeaway but sits in the food court, are we responsible for their checking their vac status? In that case, no, you wouldn't. It would actually be the premises itself. So if it's required by law that area needs full vaccination status, then it would be the owner of the premises that would do so.
And on the East Coast, many states exempted food courts because they were difficult to police. So it will be very specific in the public health order.
The obligation to check vaccine status of temp staff, it would still fall on you to check that and record that because it's your premises and they're working on the premises. So yes, that would be yours to do. I'll also say, because the vax mandate is for 16 and plus, if you have kids under 16, then there's no need to check their vaccination or hold that on you. And that's the same for customers as well. Joanne asked who will be doing the checking of businesses. I'm assuming you're asking who will be checking compliance. It'll be a mixture of the police and the Department of Health itself.
And your local councils. So
that's right.
The representatives in your council that come in to do your health inspections, they also are tasked with ensuring compliance to the public health order. And Hugo, I'm gonna answer Lee's question.
Go ahead.
It's a wider question about the impact in the East. There was a lot of apprehension. There were riots in the streets in Victoria for vaccine mandates, but once mandates were in place, most of that dissipated very quickly because it only takes a few seconds to check your customers, and staff, are obviously checked before the shift starts. So lots of restaurants thought there would be hours and hours long lines. That didn't eventuate. They thought that customers would throw bricks through their windows. That didn't eventuate. Ultimately, it was very smooth and quite easy. Certainly, people don't like to have to do it, and there's a lot of COVID fatigue on the East Coast to doing it. However, customers didn't say, "I'm never coming to your coffee shop again," or "I'm never dining here again." We didn't see that kind of militance that we had expected, and certainly. In New South Wales, it only lasted for a few months, and it is no longer in place. It wasn't in place until Omicron came, and now it's coming back slowly. Queensland and Victoria have a perpetual check-in and vaccine status, and ACT never did. So ultimately, the life cycle really depends upon the case numbers in WA. We can't speculate how long it's going to last, but it is very fast. It's a fast process, and your customers get very used to it, and so do your staff. And certainly any issues, they get worked out within the first few days and weeks.
A flyer is going to be provided by the government for cafes. I'm guessing it might mean posters. Patrina has linked a database in the chat. If you just want to link it again, maybe Patrina,
Yeah.
where you can download materials to put up on your front of your store.
Yeah, and just to say, I will put the link up. I have put it in there, but I'll do it again. But yeah, definitely. So it's got, you know, even posters stating "be kind." So there's some soft communication going out there as well for the businesses. So, but everything, social media tiles and posters are all on that page. So I'll put the link in again now.
Thanks, Patrina. Helen asks if it's being policed on the East Coast, like mystery guests or compliance officers attending the venue. Yes, it is. You won't get, obviously, roving police squads checking every single person. I think that most people are getting pinged because customers who come into the store are not being checked, and they then report the venue for non-compliance. So please make sure that you are compliant, because you know, breaking a public health order carries severe penalties, and we'll know when the public health order just what that penalty is in terms of fines. There's a question about surf club customers, but they have seats at the front of your takeaway venue. Should you still ask for proof of vaccination? Again, if that's area is part of your
Premise.
Part of your premise, thank you, mate, is then yes, then that's when you have to check it. If it's public area where they're just going out to like Eden Park, or like you know, a table and chairs on a public piece of land, and no, you don't have to check them. Joanne asks, did I hear correct that you have to be, that if you're under 16 on your payroll, they don't have to be vaccinated? The public health order is for people who are 16 and above. So therefore they are exempt from the public health order and the mandate. Brody asked, if the staff member has COVID, what is the current procedure? Obviously they would need to isolate, but is the business then required to close? Do all staff need to get tested and isolate, or is it only if they have symptoms? If WA adopts the national rule on what isolation looks like, then basically the person who is positive with COVID has to isolate for 7 days from the testing period. The whole store does not need to close down whatsoever. You can keep going as long as you have the staff to keep going. There is no need to shut the entire place and isolate everyone, only if WA adopts the national isolation rules. And we're hoping that they do that. Because basically it will mean that you'll be able to get on with it if there is a COVID case in your premises. Wes, do you want to take the next two?
So we're talking about the food courts, and so Mark and Naomi's.
Yep.
Yeah, so ultimately, you know, there are these nuances about footpaths and alfresco areas. Ultimately, your staff will be serving, so taking orders and delivering orders to customers for your venue. So there won't be an excuse why you didn't actually check customers that you served, because someone has to take their order or bring them their food. Now, if there's uncontrolled area, so the city has seating, the city has area that belongs to the city, that's totally different. Meaning that if it belongs to the city or the state, that's totally on the state. But if it is part of your premise, if it's on your DA, if you pay for that outdoor area, it's your area and you are responsible. And finally, with venues with multiple entrants, it's obviously not possible or practical to have security staff standing at every entrance. How do you recommend you monitor? Now, the reasonable steps that us and other associations so far have been publishing are at the point of sale or at entrances, or your service staff that are actually taking orders from that table, or when that order is taken at the counter. So, certainly There are lots of businesses that may have open seating, meaning that their entrance is quite wide, and we understand that. It's about being reasonable. So you're going to touch that customer at some point. Someone comes into your venue, they're going to order from you at the counter, or someone's going to take their order at the table, or they're going to come to a host or hostess stand, or going to have them in a line at the entrance. So, you know, there are certainly reasonable ways to check their vaccination status. So no, not at a table ordering on an app, but ultimately you would still be bringing them their food. So, you know, it is important to do it early on in the process. So, you know, if you have only table ordering, it is important for you to have someone at the front of your business. And in certain states' public health orders, like Victoria, they did dictate that you had to have someone at each entrance. So it will be in the public health order what exactly you need to do. So it is quite important that you read those, and we'll have a summary. So if that curveball is thrown in, like it was Victoria, that you need to have someone at every entrance, we'll let you know that. And certainly, you know, in some cases, businesses limited their entry to entry exit, you know, in one way and out another. All right, so wow, we have answered 44 questions. Hugo and Petrina, that is a record for the number of questions that were asked and answered in any webinar we've had thus far, and certainly a great outpouring of understanding from all the members in WA, and certainly, as we said before, lots of things that we say today may be changed in the public health order. So we're talking based upon the meetings that we've had with the departments in WA responsible for rolling out the public health order, as well as experience we have from the East Coast. But certainly some of our answers may change slightly when the public health orders are issued. We're just trying to get you prepared for our expectations. But again, because there are no draft public health orders, the departments and the government don't do that. They don't issue draft public health orders. They just issue a final version, and they will amend them if they find that there's material mistakes. It's always speculative until they're issued. So certainly some of the things that we say will need some tweaking, but that's why we'll send out an EDM either tomorrow, over the weekend, or early next week, once those public health orders are issued, either confirming the things that we've said, or in the case of anything that might have curveballed and changed, we'll highlight those so that you are able to plan. But certainly you will need to check your staff's vaccination status. You will need to check your customers' vaccination status. What form of IDs you may or may not need, it'll be in the public health order. Who comes into your premise, for how long, it'll be in the public health order. If you need to check it at every entrance, or if you're allowed to check it just in a reasonable way, it'll be in the public health order. We're just preparing you for what we inevitably believe is going to be the outcome, so that you can prepare over the weekend, or and certainly get your posters and everything printed out from the links that Petrina has sent out, and also were in the recent EDM for WA. So certainly, if there are any changes, we will definitely let you know those straight away. But you know, as we wind down to the end of the webinar, certainly want to take the time to thank the restaurant and catering team, Kieran, who on the back end makes sure that all of these webinars run really well, and Belinda, our COO, who takes a lot of time and energy to ensure that the webinars run smoothly, and Petrina, the membership executive in WA, and Hugo, the manager of policy and government. And certainly the council in WA, and Lee Green, who is the chair of the WA Council. So there's another question Ada has put in the chat. Are rules for exemption also valid for masks? So if it's off topic, do customers need to show their exemption for dine-in or takeaway? So masks typically have similar rules in terms of medical exemption. So if there's a mask mandate indoors and someone comes in and doesn't have a mask, you are allowed to ask them for their exemption under the public health order. Right now, there is a public health order in relation to masks. It's been in place since the 16th of January at 6 p.m. So that's in effect now. And you certainly can ask for an exemption, and a lot of people will typically just storm out. So it's very difficult to get a mask medical exemption, and certainly is not something that we've seen on many occasions. It's typically people just don't like wearing them. So Lee, thank you so much for comments, and certainly we had a record percentage of attendees versus the number of people who signed up, and certainly very happy. And Hugo and Katrina have put their email addresses into the email box, into the chat. Also, you can get me on wes@rca.asn.au, and can certainly call the main number, or Katrina. Katrina is your single source of truth in WA, and certainly is well informed on all of the up-to-date information, and will be as soon as it's published. And once the public health orders come out, once you hear the WA government or authorities begin to talk about published health orders, we will read through those very quickly and get information out as soon as they're published, so you can be informed in advance of the 31st of January. I will say that in most of the jurisdictions around the country, they waited until the night before. So even though they are telling us that they will be ready tomorrow or Monday, there is a chance that they will not be published until the 30th of Jan. And I know that's maybe disappointing to some people, but from experience that has happened on the East Coast. So certainly bear with us. We don't have anything to do with publishing them, and we'll continue to push the government to get them out as soon as possible. But thanks again, and thank you, Hugo, Katrina, and everyone else for participating, and thanks to all the participants. It's quite a strong number, and lots of people have stayed on. If you have any questions, please reach out to Restaurant and Catering. And if you're not a member of Restaurant and Catering, please reach out to Katrina or go to www.rca.asn.au, and we will most certainly welcome you as a member and get you all the information that you need. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Wes. Thanks, Hugo. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.